Tom Willander's continuous progression has many buzzing about a potential signing ahead of the trade deadline. And speaking of the trade deadline, we highlight 3 of 8 potential targets that would be perfect fits with the Canucks and have massive implications going forward into the second half of next season should they come to fruition. We'll be breaking all of that down in this episode of Canucks Digest, but first make sure to hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon so you don't miss any and all updates surrounding the Canucks this offseason. With that, let's hop into the first topic of the day, which is Tom Willander signing buzz. And if you've been watching the channel for a while, you know that we've been following Tom Willander quite a bit recently as his progression has gotten much better over the past few months. He's a 19-year-old from Stockholm, Sweden. He's a right-handed defenseman clocking in at 6'1", 179 pounds, and he was drafted 11th overall by the Canucks in 2023. He's a two-way defenseman. He has been a bit physical, and when you look at the scouting report, Willander's value stems from the combination of high-end skating and motor. He's always engaged defensively, using his dynamic posture and evasive footwork to guide attackers away from the middle and break up plays along the boards. When you add the fact that he's both strong and skilled physically, he relentlessly competes for every puck. He's a nightmare to play against. Even if you start or manage to gain an advantage, Willander has the quickness to recover most of the time. And this is sounding like a shutdown defenseman that Vancouver absolutely needs as he continues to grow and grow through the NCAA on the international level and eventually into Abbotsford once he goes out of Boston University. And especially when you look at his stats, he's done well on the international stage with the Swedish J20 team, putting up 25 points, 21 assists, and 4 goals. And when looking at Boston University, he had those exact same stats as well in the 38 games he played. And he was on a team where he wasn't on the top defensive line, not even the second top defensive line. He was on the third defensive pairing where he was making a name for himself in limited amounts and making things happen for his team. And when looking at his Swedish stats, yes, they are pretty nice to look at, but that NCAA stat is what I'm most intrigued about because he's going into a second year at Boston University where he has a chance to be the top guy on that defensive pairing, and in that top defensive pairing where he can make a splash for himself and be a lot like another player in the NHL currently that they did compare him to on this article from Canucks Daily, where it wasn't too long ago the Avalanche had one of their top prospects, Cale Makar, another top 10 pick, swoop in at the end of his collegiate season and take one of the team veteran spots amid a Stanley Cup chase. Now, I'm not saying that that's exactly what's going to happen with Willander in this case scenario, especially when you look at their defensive depth chart. He is the low man on the totem pole in that sense. Again, he hasn't been signed by the Canucks either, but it is intriguing that many reports are saying that there is a potential that he does get signed at the trade deadline because they don't have a lot of cap space left. So you look at the defensive depth chart at right defenseman, you do have Darnay, you have Juleson and McWard, and Tucker Pullman. If they unload that contract as well, I think that'll make a nice room for Willander to potentially swoop into that spot. And if he battles it out with McWard or potentially Juleson did get more playing time last season with Vancouver. And I'm not saying that Willander makes that jump this season necessarily as well. He could be one of those next man up guys for the postseason or later on in the season if injuries do hit. But again, I think it's someone that in a year from now, he definitely will find a more permanent spot on the Canucks roster, at least in Abbotsford, where he is going to perform well and eventually make that jump to the pros, especially when you look at the type of player he is. He is kind of like that Carson Soucy shutdown type where he is a bit bigger, he's lankier, but he's also physical and will make things happen. He has that offensive charge to him where he can make opportunities happen for his teammates and get on the point sheet where he can at any measure he can. And that is something that Vancouver definitely does need, especially when you look at their defensive pairings. Those are solid guys where I am confident that they will be the starters for the entire season. And that isn't saying that I hope that any of these guys do falter, especially when you look at the depth chart. I'm hoping that all the best for these guys. But again, I think with Willander's progression and the optimism that Allvin and the organization seem to have with him, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how he can fit into this Vancouver Canucks defensive roster if he is presented the opportunity. And I think if he is presented with that opportunity with a bit more growth in the NCAA, I think he's going to play out that entire season there. And then they're going to assess where he could rank when they get to that point. But I think Willander will be a nice fit for Vancouver come playoff time when they need those guys to be reliable if they need to be called up for those injury cases. We saw last season with bringing in all these AHL guys in the postseason where that was a benefit and also a detriment. It was a benefit where teams didn't have much tape on these guys to study, but it was also a detriment where these guys didn't have much playoff experience or playing experience really to speak of in the pro level. So getting more experience for those guys is definitely key before you throw them into the deep water with the Sharks. But again, I think this is going to be something where Willander is going to work. He's going to make a splash on the Canucks roster. Maybe not this season exactly. He still is young and has a season to play in the NCAA. But I think in 2 years from now, like the season after this season, I think he's going to make a splash on that Vancouver Canucks roster more frequently than most other prospects on the Vancouver Canucks payroll at this point. However, with that, let's hop into the second topic of the day, which is 3 early trade deadline targets. And we see here in an article from Canucks Army that they were looking way ahead at 8 puck-moving rentals potentially available to the Canucks at or near the 2025 NHL trade deadline. And there was very many appealing names on this list, and we're going to highlight 3 of those guys in particular. The first of which being Olli Maatta, who did play with Filip Hronek in Detroit. He does also have a cap hit of only $3 million. So if the Vancouver Canucks are able to take him on and offload another guy, maybe, I'm not exactly sure. We're not going to get into all those trade discussions right now, but it's just that looking at who these guys are and who they could be on this Vancouver Canucks roster, I think if you bring him in with having experience play with Hronek, it does give Hronek someone good to play with and someone he has experience playing with, especially if they do decide to break him and Quinn Hughes up like it has been reported, where maybe not for the full season, but in a few games here and there, maybe we'll see some different defensive pairings just to see how they match up for later on in the season or into the postseason, because I don't doubt the Canucks are going to be making the postseason in that respect. So it will be interesting to see what they try and do with these defensive pairings, especially if they go out and get a guy that Hronek has played with before and doesn't shake up too much. It's someone that you're bringing in over. Yeah, it would be a new teammate for the rest of the team, but it's someone Hronek has that familiarity with. And this Canucks roster is built upon chemistry and depth. And I think if they have both of those in spades, I think Vancouver is going to be doing nothing but cruising through into the postseason. And that's when it gets down to the nitty gritty of refining the things that you needed to fix in the regular season, like the power play, penalty kill, and so many other things. But if you have chemistry and depth already locked down in spades, I think that goes a long way for the Vancouver Canucks heading forward into next season and into the postseason. A second player that we were also looking at was Will Borgen. He is also a former teammate of a current Vancouver Canucks in Carson Soucy with a $2.7 million cap hit. You see there, he does have puck moving ability. And I think, again, if chemistry is the thing that forms this team, bring in a guy who does have that chemistry with Carson Soucy, especially Carson Soucy, who's a defender who is one of our top 3 defenders, and he would be number 3, but he is one of those top 3 guys. So if you put a guy in there where he can fit nicely into the top 4 with him, as someone he's played with before, it would benefit him in a way like Hronek, where you have that guy you have the familiarity with. It's almost like a Goose and Maverick situation where they can just be a great pairing and make things happen not only on their end, but also for the offensive end. We've seen how this Canucks roster definitely needs some more offense going, but that's also the style of coaching and play that Rick Tocchet has trying to instill into these players, where it's a more physical defensive game and try and get your opportunities when they happen. Don't try and force opportunities where you're in a spot where you have a giveaway. That is the motto of a lot of other teams, but I think Vancouver is trying to have a way where they're more of a hybrid style rather than leaning on one side more than the other. The third person we're going to look at is also Elias Pettersson from the Pittsburgh Penguins. Yes, this would be another Pettersson to add to the team and another Swede. But again, I think he is someone who has proved to have great puck moving ability. He does come with a cap hit of 4.025, so it is the biggest price tag on this list. But again, Patrik Allvin has been a wizard of sorts as far as making money move around and disappear and reappear in other contracts, where they're able to make these cap-friendly deals that also extend into long-term and great short-term deals as well. So if they bring in a guy like Pettersson, who is a Swede with a Swedish GM, I think that bodes well as far as getting a cheaper price tag for him and being able to bring him in on a much more cap-friendly deal. So it will be interesting to see who they would potentially move out or some draft picks they would give up to make that happen. We saw how the one-year rentals went with Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov. Yes, they're no longer with us, unfortunately, but they did unfortunately price themselves out. So if you can bring a guy in who isn't going to price himself out, I think that puts them in a nice position where they can have some cap-friendly deals, where it's not a situation like this past offseason where they went into free agency with so many boxes to check off and players to pay that I think they found themselves in a bit of a hole in that sense, but they made it work out for the best. But I do think that going into next season with some of the UFAs that we have coming up, I think it would be nice to bring in some of these guys where they can have these team chemistry things and be able to work out a much more cap-friendly deal so they can stay a bit longer than a one-year rental to try and make a one-year push for the cup. But I don't think Vancouver's in the business of one-year stands. I think they're in the business of keeping that window open for a few years to try and not only win one Stanley Cup, but also two, maybe more, and have a dynasty. That's what every team wants, I think. And I think GM Patrik Allvin and head coach Rick Tocchet are definitely hungry for those championships and definitely want to see them. But let us know what you guys think down below. What do you guys think about these trade prospects? Do you like them? Do you think that they would be a good fit in Vancouver? And let us know what you think about the growth of Tom Willander. How is he fitting in to this Vancouver Canucks team? When do you think he will make that jump to the Vancouver Canucks roster? How long do you see him playing in Abbotsford before he makes that jump? Let us know what you guys think down in the comments. And with that, let's get into everyone's favorite topic, which is comment of the day. And we see here in a comment from Fabled Hero 929 saying, it's crazy how much the Sedins were disrespected in their careers. They were great players and even better citizens with how much they did in the community. I think Miller may end up as a top 5 franchise skater behind the Sedins and Linden. I definitely agree with that second part there and that first part. The Sedins and the Vancouver Canucks as a whole and their players are definitely those players and the team that is counted on the least and forgotten about so much when talking about Canadian teams and just great teams. This is a team that in the early 2000s, they dominated in the Western Conference. They didn't make as many finals appearances as they would have liked to, but they were regular season titans, and they are continuing that into this Rick Tocchet era. Would be nice to see that translate to playoff wins and Stanley Cups, and I think that they are on the rise of potentially doing that. And it is nice to see that when players come to Vancouver, they're not just playing for the team or playing for the number on their back and the logo on their chest. They're also playing for the city and making sure they integrate themselves with the community. JT Miller has done that. Quinn Hughes has done that. Other players have done that, and they have made themselves pillars of this city and the community. And it's great to see that these players are going all in, not just on the team, but also on the city and the fans. You love to see that from your players. You can't say that about many other hockey fans or fan bases and players in the league, but it's amazing to see that we have that in Vancouver. Love to see it. Let us know what you guys think down below. But that's going to do it for this episode of Canucks Digest. I've been your host, Griffin. Take care.